All right. Hello, hello, hello. I am super excited to be back here on a No CD stream, and I'm just going to give folks a few minutes to kind of come in and get settled and to start diving in and asking questions. So yeah, I'll kind of give folks just a second. As soon as you get on here, if you want to go ahead and start asking any questions you have, I'm going to try to get through as many as I possibly can tonight, just while folks are coming in and getting settled. For those of you that I don't know, I'm going to introduce myself really quickly, and then I'm happy to dive into whatever you want to know, whether that's about my story or advocacy, OCD treatment, any of those things that might be helpful for you. So I am Katie. Some of y'all might know me on my Instagram as RevK Runs Beyond OCD. I am also an IOCDF lead advocate. I have OCD. I've navigated OCD pretty much my whole life, but kept it a secret for a very long time because I am also an ordained minister. As someone who was going through their ordination process and going through the process of becoming a member of the clergy, I had a lot of shame for a long time about my OCD. I had a lot of shame about my intrusive thoughts, particularly things related to harm, related to scrupulosity, so many things that I know folks here might navigate. And I spent such a long time trying to push that down, trying to cover it up, and really didn't get treatment for a really long time because I was fearful that it would impact my role as a minister, impact the way that folks see me. Ended up getting incredibly sick, kind of in my mid-20s in one of my first big ministry roles. I was working at a private school as the interfaith chaplain with 2,700 families in a role that was very public. And in the midst of a lot of tragedies and traumas in the community, my OCD just exploded and latched onto everything significant, everything important to me, from my students to my faith to the families that I was working with. And I eventually got to the point that I was actually fearful that I had committed crimes and somehow forgotten about them. I would sit at home at night after working as a chaplain with kids all day and try not to call the police on myself for crimes I didn't commit. And nobody had any idea what I was navigating because I kept it a secret. Eventually, I kind of hit rock bottom and needed to get evidence-based treatment. And I was very thankful to have access to exposure and response prevention that a lot of folks here I know are navigating. And it not only saved my life, but helped me reclaim my life and reclaim joy, start to live in the present, maybe for the first time ever. And coming out of that experience, I realized that I wanted my students from all different faith backgrounds to recognize that it is not shameful to seek treatment, regardless of the faith tradition or the culture that you come from, that you can, in fact, seek treatment and live this big, beautiful, awesome life that you were created to live. So I've really loved getting into advocacy in this area. Now I'm working on my doctorate in the area of faith and mental health, and have a private practice called Faith and Mental Health Integrative Services, where I get to work alongside a lot of awesome clinicians like the ones at No CD to help folks navigate, well, what's faith? And what's OCD, and how does all of this fit together? And also, I do a lot of work with No CD in the area of running. I'm right now running 50 ultra marathons in 50 states to raise money for folks who are seeking treatment from No CD. So lots of crossovers professionally and as an advocate and with OCD and all sorts of different things. So that's a little bit about me. And this looks like it has given a lot of time for folks to start putting questions in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and start diving into these, and we will see where it goes. Thank you for listening to me ramble for a minute. Let's see. Let's go ahead and, oh, wow, we already have a bunch here. Okay. So Naomi, just started my journey with No CD. So first of all, congratulations. I'm excited. That's a big step to kind of take in that area. And also suffer from depression. So just want to first of all point out that this is very much a co-occurring disorder. There are a lot of folks who both navigate OCD and depression. So how would you separate depression thoughts and genuine harm OCD thoughts. So I would love to see a little bit further down. Are you talking about the self-harm piece? Are you talking about the other harm piece? I'm not sure, since you're kind of pairing that with the depression. But I think the depression, obviously we're going to treat in a little bit of a different way, but anything that's OCD harm related thoughts is something that you're going to be fearful about, because it opposes your value. So if you're saying, oof, what if this happens? What if I am dangerous to another? What if I'm dangerous to myself? And you're saying, well, I don't want to be, but I'm afraid that I am. That's really where that OCD piece is coming into play. Something that is OCD, you're really asking that what if question, and you're fearful of the answer because you're fearful that that is going to go against your value. Now, if you're saying, I am feeling incredibly sad, I am feeling disconnected from those things around me, I am feeling numb, those feelings in and of themselves, that could be a sign of depression. That also could be depression coming from the OCD. Now, if you're thinking about a self-harm component, there is kind of self-harm related OCD themes where someone might say, well, what if I harm myself? Or I'm afraid that I'm going to harm myself. Now that would be treated with exposure and response prevention as well, because that would be somebody saying, well, I don't want to harm myself, but I'm afraid that I'm going to. So that would be kind of a separate piece too. So curious if that's the component that you're asking about. But hopefully that helps kind of parse out a little bit about what that harm OCD might mean or might look like. And that's definitely something that I navigated. Let's see. What would be your advice on someone stuck in a cycle of doing exposures and having success, and then losing it and relapsing and having awful days? I suffer with ROCD. So for folks listening, ROCD is relationship OCD. And that can relate to a lot of different things with a partner. So just like any other type of OCD latches on to the things that are the most significant, to the things that are the most important to us. And often that could be a romantic partner or a friend, right? Someone in our life. But a lot of times it's really interesting. We'll start to get better. We might have success with our exposure and response prevention. And then we might feel like we're starting to take steps back. And I would really challenge you around the word that you're using here, the word relapse, because sometimes it feels like if we take a step back that we're relapsing. And I would make the argument that it's not necessarily true, that a lapse isn't necessarily a relapse, that we're always going to take steps forward and steps back. And that having an awful day or feeling awful is no indication of where we actually are with our treatment at this point. It's not about how we feel, it's about how we respond. So if you're doing your exposures, if you're engaging in that response prevention, and then sometimes feel like, oh, those thoughts are popping back up, you staying in a space of recovery is really saying, I am willing to let those thoughts be there. Folks who follow my Instagram might be familiar with, I'm willing to stick with the ick. And it's all about that. And that's really what dictates the recovery, not whether or not it's a good or a bad day. So sometimes it can be really helpful to actually think of, you know what, I'm doing really well, and this is a day that's feeling kind of hard, to see that day as an opportunity to continue to make OCD smaller, and to recognize that we actually get the choice to decide, is it going to be a lapse or is it going to be a relapse? And I think that every time we can make the choice for it to be a lapse, we can continue to take steps forward, even if we feel like we've already taken a step back. Okay, I'm skipping around a little bit here to get to some different types of questions. Let's see. Sorry, I'll take this one down. Let's see. Okay, so here's a more specific question. Now I have harm OCD. Some recent thoughts here. I bought today a burger, and my wife looked kind of in a bad or evil way at it, and I'm afraid that I will get sick if I eat it. Should I eat it? What a great example. Yes, you should eat it. Now, here's the thing. Eating it is the exposure part. You would also have to engage in that response prevention part too. So that means not doing anything after to try to make that action okay. That would be not checking to see how you feel, not praying to make sure that everything's going to be all right, not asking your wife whether or not she did something bad to the burger. It would be sitting with all of that stuff that comes up with it. And we're going to talk about this more tonight, but that response prevention becomes just as significant as the exposure. You also might say some things like, you know what, I may or may not get sick, but I'm going to eat this burger anyway. You can really say, bring on that anxiety, right? Because we're not trying to push it away. We're not eating it to prove that we're not going to get sick. We're saying, you know what, I don't know, but I am making the choice to live my life in a value-driven way that's not dictated by OCD. I'm trusting that it's probably OCD, right? But I am willing to take that risk. I'm willing to take that leap. Okay. Can you share about the type of exposures you did? Yeah, so when I was in treatment, I engaged in a lot of different types of exposures. I think the big one, what I spent the most time doing, actually related to imaginal exposures and scripting. So I had a lot of harm themes where I was fearful that I was a harmful person, that I was fearful, what if I've committed violent acts and forgotten about it? Kind of having this false memory component that folks might be familiar with. And for that, I would do scripting with my therapist. Now, sometimes that meant writing out a script. Other times that meant specifically standing up and doing what we would call Wonder Woman pose, putting my shoulders back and saying, I may or may not be a harmful person. I may or may not have done X, Y, and Z. And actually laying out in a really detailed way all of those things that I was fearful of and saying they may or may not be true. Now, this for me was really tough and really challenging, particularly around harm and false memory aspects, because it felt really irresponsible, just like a lot of aspects might feel when we're doing exposures, particularly if they relate to things that we really care about, which often OCD does. So every single time I felt like, well, I shouldn't be doing this, and it's not responsible for me to be doing this. How could it possibly be responsible for me to be doing this? And that's really where that response prevention piece for me came in, where often I would finish off even my scripting by saying, you know what, I am willing to let all of that scary stuff be true for a chance at the life that I want, for a chance at the life that OCD is trying to take away from me. Okay. Oh, this is a great, oh, it just scrolled all the way down and I just kind of lost where I was. Hold on. Okay, that comment was going to be completed. Let's see. Thank you so much for your work with NoCD and the IOCDF. You're welcome, Chandler. Thanks for the kind words. Something I struggle with is weighing probabilities. NoCD's post says, and let's see. Here we are. It's a little bit later on. So let me pull this up. Just because something is uncertain doesn't mean it has a 50-50 likelihood. Yes, the point isn't to figure out the likelihood. The point is to take the risks necessary in order to live a healthier life. Yeah, this is huge. And I talk with clients a lot about this, particularly in the area of religious scrupulosity, but this really can come up anywhere. Where often when we hear that something's uncertain, or when somebody with OCD hears that something's uncertain, we automatically put it at 50-50. Like if you're saying, I may or may not be a dangerous person, you're literally hearing in your mind often, well, it's a 50-50 shot that I'm a horrible, murderous, dangerous person, right? And that's not at all what we're saying. We're saying to accept the uncertainty, which also means maybe having radical trust, radical faith that it's probably OCD, while accepting the same level of uncertainty that everyone else accepts in their day-to-day lives. Like, for instance, I am sitting here and accepting the uncertainty that my roof may or may not collapse because my house may or may not have been put together appropriately. I don't know for sure. I didn't see someone build my house. I don't know exactly how building works. Not sure. But I'm having this radical faith in this moment that it's safe for me to sit where I'm sitting. I'm going to trust that while accepting the uncertainty. So the point isn't for me to sit here and figure out, well, is there a good shot that my roof is going to collapse? It's about taking the risk that's necessary in order for me to move forward with my life. Now, that can seem a lot scarier and a lot harder with our fears. So if you're fearful that, well, maybe I ran over someone with my car on the way home, maybe that's what that bump was. It can feel really scary to say that you're willing to accept that uncertainty. But again, you're not accepting it in this 50-50 kind of way. We're not trying to figure that out. Instead, you're having radical faith that if it looks like OCD and smells like OCD, it's probably OCD. You're being willing to accept that you're wrong while continuing to move forward as if it's OCD. I hope that answers your question. But again, I used to very much see it in this 50-50 way. And I think for a long time, that prevented me from really taking the leap. When I would look in the mirror and say, yeah, I may or may not be a bad person, what I actually heard was, I may be a bad person. I forgot that I was saying may or may not, that we're accepting the uncertainty. We're not really trying to accept that bad thing actually being true, just the level of uncertainty that everyone else accepts in the world on a daily basis. So Chandler, I hope that answers your question. If I didn't, feel free to clarify anything and I'll loop back to it. Yeah, so I'm scared to know or to actually get diagnosed with OCD, but I'm pretty sure I have all of the symptoms of it. So I wanted to pull this one up because I think sometimes it can feel really scary to get a diagnosis. I know a lot of folks are on here because you're seeking treatment with no CD. There might be some folks on here who haven't sought treatment or who haven't received an official diagnosis yet. I will say I was somebody who was in the camp of being terrified to get an official diagnosis. I was doing my master's at Emory before getting ordained, and I had a mentor at the time tell me that I shouldn't seek treatment for what I was experiencing. At the time, it was checking all night long. It was kind of before stuff had shifted into harm for me. But I didn't want to seek treatment because I was fearful that it would impact my psychological evaluations. That's what my mentor had told me. And that was the worst advice I could have ever followed, because actually getting a diagnosis meant that I could seek that evidence-based treatment. The evidence-based treatment that not only saved my life, but changed my life in such a way that I could finally live into all of those values that I wanted to live into and all of those values that I'd been created to live. So I know sometimes it can feel really scary to get a diagnosis, but I think getting a diagnosis, whatever it is, it's opening up your life for you to really be able to get back to that person that you are without having the illness impact you, because you can actually have it treated. Let's see. Oh, I'm so glad. I get so excited when folks ask questions about faith, because this is kind of my full-time jam. So how do you advise returning to something like religion after OCD somewhat destroyed faith with fear? Yeah, so I'm so glad that you asked this question. This is a lot of the work that I do with folks. So I get the chance to, I was an interfaith chaplain for a long time. So now do faith and OCD work with lots of different faith traditions. And a lot of folks that I see, OCD has kind of ripped their faith away from them. Now, sometimes there's these additional layers of religious trauma, and that's definitely something that we want to process and work through as well. But from an OCD standpoint, yeah, OCD often takes you far away from your faith, while just like any other type of OCD, telling you that it's actually making you more pious or more religious, right? And it can be really hard and really scary after going through treatment to reunite with your faith. But actually, ERP, the really cool thing about that is engaging in exposure and response prevention isn't opposing your faith. It's helping you get back to your faith in a value-driven way, helping you get back to your faith in a way that's actually meaningful to you, as opposed to you worshiping in a way that OCD wants you to worship. So I think reuniting with your faith, there is an aspect of being able to accept uncertainty, maybe for the first time, as a part of that faith. I think diving back into a faith community in a healthy way means saying, yeah, you know what? I am willing to accept that I may or may not be right about this. I'm a minister and I'm saying that I'm willing to accept that I may or may not be right about this whole faith, this whole religion thing, but it's meaningful to me. So I'm going to move towards it anyway. And even thinking about how we might pray after moving through recovery or after moving through OCD treatment, I think can be really crucial. Often folks will ask me, they'll say prayer is value driven, but how do I pray in a way that's not compulsive? Well, that might mean saying, hey, God, or hey, creator, whatever is meaningful to you in terms of language. Please walk with me through this uncertainty. Please help me to sit with the fear, even if it's really hard. Please help me to lean into my values while moving through and letting this uncertainty be there. So I think particularly after moving through this OCD piece, we can actually kind of unite that uncertainty with faith and ask God to walk with us through that. We can also acknowledge that faith is never about certainty. Sometimes faith communities make it sound like it is, and it's really not. The idea of faith is always leaning into something that's uncertain and making the choice to believe in it anyway. And I actually think ERP can make us stronger in our faith, regardless of what that faith tradition is. That you can really have faith in yourself, faith in your treatment, and faith in your religious tradition, and that all of those three things can fit together. So I hope that answered your question. There are a lot of nuances. I know a lot of folks navigate this, so please know that you are not alone. And I really think you can reunite with your religion in a way that's value driven, maybe even more so after navigating ERP. Okay. Yeah, so Madison, this is a really great question, and we get this question a lot. So do we have to have therapy, or can we recover with education and books, peer groups, etc.? So always, of course, the thing that we push for is to work with a licensed clinician around OCD. And I know NoCD does a really great job of low-cost resources in so many different places for this, now internationally, which is awesome. I know, though, that sometimes that still goes beyond what someone might be able to afford, and that can be really, really tricky. So while we always recommend that therapy component, there are some other awesome resources that can help someone move towards recovery. Always that first line is to be able to work with a clinician to develop your hierarchy and all of these other pieces. But NoCD has so many great free resources too. IOCDF has awesome free resources. I'm also a big supporter of Kim Quinlan's CBT school, which kind of helps you navigate the ERP process on your own. Peer groups can be really great. I know NoCD has a ton of free support groups. I know I do free faith and OCD support groups too. So all of those things can be really, really helpful. John Grayson's book, Shalin Nicely's books, John Hirschfield's books, and they can be really, really great either with therapy or because someone might not be able to afford it at this particular time. So thank you so much for asking that. Okay, let me keep scrolling down. I'm going to see if I have kind of a different kind of question here. Is there Okay. A couple of these are similar. I'm trying to have something totally different here. Yeah, a lot of people are asking about kind of the differences between what's actually OCD and what's not. So I'm seeing a couple different things. Oh, yeah. So Michael, you're asking, yeah, NoCD is not a religious organization. I work with folks from lots of different faith traditions and no faith traditions. I happen to be a minister who has OCD and an interfaith member of the clergy. So I talk a lot about that stuff, particularly because I work with folks around religious scrupulosity. But when I talk about radical faith, I don't necessarily mean from a religious perspective. Faith can be anything that you aren't certain about, but you're willing to lean into anyway. So when I'm saying having radical faith, I'm saying really having radical faith in your recovery, having radical faith that it's possible for you to lean into your fear, even though it seems really, really scary, and that you can sit with all that uncertainty, that you can stick with the ick, which is something I say a lot, and that you can continue to move through that, even if it's really scary. So often the OCD will tell you, oh, this is an OCD, or this particular thing is different. Maybe yours is different. Maybe it'll tell you that you're never really going to get better. Well, you can have radical faith even in the midst of uncertainty. Again, not necessarily from a religious perspective, but just like you might have faith that you're going to do well in a test, you can lean into that and say, you know what, I'm going to make the choice to really believe that this is probably OCD, not sure for certain, right? But I'm going to lean into this anyway and continue to move through in a way that's value driven. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Let's see. It just totally skipped around. So now I've totally lost where I am. Let's see. Oh, okay. This is a great kind of more general question. What is a normal day like for you after going through treatment? Do you still get intrusive thoughts that go against your values? Is it easier to let them go? Yeah, Sarah, this is such an awesome question. So this has been different at different stages of my life. At one point, I was in a period where I was doing treatment like every day. I wasn't, I was someone that nobody really knew how sick I was when I was at my sickest back in 2018 and 2019. But I was really seeking treatment every night, doing exposures and living my life in the way of treatment being a really core component. And the goal really with treatment is to get to a point where you kind of become your own therapist, which is very much how it's kind of become for me. And my therapist actually eventually kicked me out, where it was in a place of, hey, you have to learn to do this on your own. And she very much believed that I was ready to do it on my own. So I spent a couple of years actually without a therapist altogether. And I'm now seeing someone again, not specifically for ERP, but to continue to support me through just different highs and lows of life and OCD and all of those things. So to answer that second part of your question, I still get intrusive thoughts. And I want folks to hear intrusive thoughts are just thoughts. Thoughts are thoughts are thoughts are thoughts are thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are just thoughts. And I think it's really important to note that, because sometimes with OCD, we make the assumption that our thoughts are different from everybody else's thoughts. And that simply isn't the case. Everybody has weird thoughts. Everybody has bizarre thoughts. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. The difference between somebody with OCD and somebody without OCD is that somebody with OCD gets stuck on those thoughts, while somebody without OCD probably isn't going to get stuck on those thoughts. So yeah, I still have intrusive thoughts because I'm still a human being. And yes, I still might notice those thoughts that go against my values, but it's much, much, much easier to let them go. So being in recovery, you still might notice those thoughts as they float by, but you can say, I'm going to choose not to latch on to that. I'm going to choose not to engage in a compulsion that'll make that thought get even more stuck. And I definitely don't always do that perfectly, but I'm somebody who believes that by remembering every day, yep, I have OCD and I might approach thoughts in a certain way, that it's easier for me to let them go. And I can say that I'm at a point now where even if I have those thoughts or notice those thoughts, they don't impact me remotely like they did in 2018, 2019, when I was at my sickest. I'm living the most joyful, recovery-filled life that I ever have had. And I still have intrusive thoughts, but I don't give them that same power that I once did. Yeah, this is a great question from, let's see, from Wendy at 813. Sometimes it feels like I'm trying to hold on to the OCD instead of letting go. Is this likely, or is the OCD trying to keep all of me? I think we could make an argument in either direction. I think sometimes we hold on to the OCD because of secondary gain. Secondary gain means in some ways that we're kind of benefiting from that act of almost having that OCD component. I'll say some of my secondary gain from OCD, quite honestly, was I was at my sickest in the midst of a period of a lot of grief and trauma. And the OCD for me was covering up a lot of those actual feelings that I needed to grapple with in the midst of a really tough time. it was hard for me to let go in some ways because the OCD was preventing me from dealing with that actual stuff that I was dealing with. Now, we all have different secondary gains of reasons that we might hold on to the OCD. It might be as simple as we're so used to feeling anxious that we get anxious not feeling anxious, that it feels anxiety provoking to let go of that anxiety. I'll be curious in the chat if anybody else relates to getting anxious about not being anxious and kind of that backdoor spike. So we might be trying to hold on to it. At the same time, I feel like OCD, as you're kicking it out the door, it's going to do those final punches and screams because it's getting further away from you, that it might also just be trying to hold on, right? I think the closer you get to recovery, the more OCD digs in its heels, the more OCD latches on and screams all sorts of crazy stuff to get you to stay there. So I think the reason really doesn't matter whether or not you are holding on to the OCD or the OCD is holding on to you. The real question is, do you want to let OCD continue to impact your life? Do you want a life without OCD? And if you really want a life without OCD, whether it's trying to hang on to you or you're trying to hang on to it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because this is a choice that you get to make. And that actually brings me to a really interesting conversation of choice. I know I've kind of been scrolling through over here because there's a bajillion really, really awesome questions. And a bunch of folks have been asking, well, how do I tell what's real from what's OCD? And that's a big thing I know I've thought a lot about. But generally, if you can put a what if in front of it, even if it doesn't look like you can stick a what if in front of it, if you can add if you're thinking, well, I'm worried I'm a horrible person, and you can add, what if I'm a horrible person? Or if you're worried and you're thinking, well, I might have sinned against God, if you can add, what if I sinned against God? And it's something that opposes your values, most likely that's probably OCD, right? If it looks like OCD and it smells like OCD, it's probably OCD. And particularly when you're in OCD treatment, I would encourage you to really treat anything that you even think might be OCD as OCD. I generally think if something is actually urgent, if something actually needs our attention, we're going to take care of it without asking the question, is this OCD? If you're even asking the question, is this OCD? Probably OCD. And for the sake of your recovery, for the sake of those around you, I would encourage you to treat it as OCD. Now, once we figure out that something's OCD, I like folks to know that they have a choice. And I think we forget this a lot. Often we get frustrated because we feel like we don't have a choice about having OCD. Like we don't have a choice about getting these intrusive thoughts or getting stuck on these intrusive thoughts. And here's the thing, we don't have a choice about that, but we do have a choice about how we respond. And it's funny because a lot of times we don't really take the offer up on that choice, right? We say, oh, it's too hard, right? I've totally been there. OCD has been screaming stuff at me. And I say, well, it's too hard to just sit with it. But here's the thing, I can't change the fact that I have OCD or that it's screaming stuff at me, but I can make the effort to not respond in a way that's compulsive. I can make the effort to sit with the discomfort, to stick with the ick, and to make OCD smaller. And it can feel really, really powerful when we realize we actually do have a choice, not in having OCD, but in how we respond. And it might not feel like it, but we get a choice each and every time. And I think the first day I woke up and realized that was the first day to reclaiming my life and realizing, you know what, I don't have to continue to give up over my life to OCD because OCD can't take our lives without us giving it over, right? We can hang on by engaging in treatment, just like so many of you here tonight are doing, and making the choice to move towards our values instead of move towards the OCD. Let's see. Oh, my fiance, Ethan Smith. I love you too, Ethan. Thank you. I think you're also amazing. For those of you who don't know, he's one of our IOCDF national advocates and my fiance. So nice shout out there. Let's see. Yeah. So And I know we addressed this a little bit earlier. Mom of a teen with OCD, notice a lot of depression and anxiety in him. Depression and general anxiety disorder are definitely disorders that can co-occur with OCD. I am not a clinician, but this is just from work that I get to do with religious group and in my personal life. But also, as somebody who spent the last 7 years as an interfaith chaplain with students, these are definitely things that I've seen along with OCD. So a couple different things. Someone can definitely become depressed because they're experiencing OCD, but these can definitely be things that are separate too and can be treated in a way that's separate. The really great thing is that No CD, which I know y'all are on here with them tonight, really kind of specializes in all of this. Yeah, specializes obviously in OCD and anxiety disorders, but they also have a lot of awesome clinicians who are able to kind of separate, well, what's the OCD from what's a co-occurring condition. But I do want folks to know that depression comes up a lot with OCD. It did with me as somebody who had never really experienced depression before, particularly because the condition was so incredibly debilitating. So there are times that if you treat the OCD, this other component might start to dissipate. Sometimes they need to be treated in some different ways. But it's actually one of the reasons, going back to the question earlier, that working on your specific case or your team's specific case with a licensed clinician or the No CD provider can be really, really helpful and really life-changing, since every case is a little bit different. Okay. Let's see. Oh, it keeps jumping all the way around here. Wow, there are so many questions on here. Yeah, I see folks talking about the religious piece. It's so different for each person. Some people stepping away from their particular faith tradition can be really helpful for them. For others, engaging in a faith tradition with theological flexibility and using their own flexibility to get back to that in a value-driven way is significant. What I always say, whatever is value-driven for you is what we want you to get back to, whether that's with a faith tradition or a cultural practice or not. It's all about what's meaningful for you so that the OCD never takes that away from you. This is a tough question. What are the best practices to accept the OCD thoughts and actually being at peace with them? Whew. Accepting and being at peace. So I think the first thing I would say with this is acknowledging that that thoughts are thoughts are thoughts. I think sometimes when we say, "Oh, this is an OCD thought," or "This isn't an OCD thought," we're almost giving them too much power. And a thought isn't an OCD thought. It's just a thought. It's our OCD that's latched onto it. We've gotten stuck because we happen to have OCD. So I think that's the first piece, because I think that helps us recognize that this particular thought doesn't have power. My current therapist does a really great job of always saying, "Oh, good thing that's just a thought," because that sounds really scary, but who knows? It's just a thought. It doesn't have any power. So acknowledging that, I think, is the first part in just accepting, not necessarily even just the content, but just that a thought is a thought is a thought. Intrusive thoughts are just thoughts. Being at peace with them. I think that comes with exposure and response prevention, which we've already talked about a little bit tonight. For anybody who's just tuning in, exposure and response prevention, you're working with a clinician to engage in exposures, to engage in things that are going to heighten the OCD, to expose yourself to your fears without engaging in the compulsive behavior, without trying to decrease that anxiety. So that's the response prevention piece. So the coming to peace with them, I would actually say, comes with that ERP. It's continuing to say, well, a thought is a thought is a thought, but I'm going to accept all of the uncertainty around it anyway. I'm going to engage in my in vivo exposure, or I'm going to engage in my scripting. I'm going to engage in my imaginal exposure. I'm going to do my ERP homework. I'm going to attend my support group. And I'm actually going to sit with that anxiety. Eventually, that anxiety is going to come down. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we say, okay, I'm going to sit with this thought, and then all of a sudden I'm going to be at peace with it. It's really not that. It's about saying, well, I'm willing to be anxious. I'm willing to let the anxiety around this thought be here forever, but I'm still not going to respond in a way that's compulsive. I am still going to live into my values. I think one of my big turning points was when I got to the point of saying, I am willing to feel this bad forever. But I'm still not going to give into my OCD anymore. I'm willing to be sick forever. I'm willing to feel this icky, to have all of these thoughts and never be at peace, but I'm still not going to compulse. And that's actually when you end up becoming at peace with all of the thoughts, right? When you're willing to never be at peace with them and willing to let them be there. Now, it sounds kind of contradictory, but I think that that makes a lot of sense. Um, I think I'm going to get into some more questions, but I think, you know, I want folks here to know too that I used to, and I did a post on this actually earlier today, but I used to watch advocates, whether at the conference, like we have the IOCDF conference coming up in Denver, or listening to OCD Stories podcast, any of these things. And I mean, as recent ago as 2019, I used to hear advocates talking, and I would think that'll never be me. I used to think I'm never going to get better. My OCD is different from their OCD. I used to think my thoughts are real. I'm gonna get emotional. I used to think, I don't deserve to get better. And that was just what my OCD was telling me. And I want you to hear from me. I think sometimes it's really easy to get on these live streams and say, "Oh, just do this and just do this and just do this," and you'll move through. And I want y'all to know that I've been where you are, and I thought that I wasn't going to have a life. I thought that I didn't deserve to have a life, and I could never have imagined 2 or 3 years later that I would be in this position. With advocacy and with recovery and with life and with vocation. And all of you will get there and can get there and deserve to get there. And man, it was hard. I could say a lot of bad words about how hard it was. But it was really worth it. And I didn't believe it. Every time someone sat on here like I'm doing and said, you can get better, I didn't believe them because I thought mine was different, but yours isn't. Yours is not different. That's what the OCD is saying. It's not the truth. And you really, really deserve to get better. And you deserve to lean into all of this scary stuff and beat this OCD. And I just want you to know that you can. And just because I'm talking about this doesn't mean that it wasn't hard. I know how just bad it feels, but you're going to get there and you can get there. So just wanted to offer that up a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So Tony at 826, you are talking about black and white thinking here, going kind of from one extreme to another. I am I'm very good at black and white thinking, which is not a compliment to myself. That means that we often kind of think in extremes. And especially like you said, in trying to change a behavior, sometimes we can move from one far extreme to the other. So just an example might even be with something like exercise, where you might say, oh, I haven't really been engaging in physical activity, so I'm going to start exercising. And it might go from 0 to I'm exercising 10 times a day, every day. Well, that's not healthy either. So really trying to find that position of the gray, right, can be really helpful and really effective of saying, well, where's the in between here, right? I don't need to not engage in any activity if that's not value driven for me. I also don't need to be doing it 10 hours a day, but how do I find this middle space? And I would encourage you to actually think about that middle space as the space that's kind of uncomfortable. Often for folks with OCD, at least for me, the extremes can feel more comfortable, but that discomfort in the middle, that gray space, is often where we want to be. So for instance, with that running example, for me, I'm an ultra marathon runner, which is extreme by nature, but I'm actually the most in the gray that I've ever been with my training. I spent a long time in this extreme high training area and injury and all kinds of stuff, and finding that gray between not pushing myself and pushing myself too hard has been the most healthy. And I think most areas of our lives with OCD, finding that gray can be actually the healthiest. Let's see. Yeah, OCD can definitely make you feel alone. Yeah, and OCD, I see a lot of folks talking about physical symptoms too, and just for y'all to hear too, just because it's accompanied by physical symptoms, still OCD. That's still another trick by OCD, whether that's a particular body response or whether that feels like an urge, any of those things. You have to remember that your brain is dictating how you're feeling in different parts of your body. And just because it's accompanied by physical symptoms doesn't mean it's not OCD. It's just OCD taking on a new form. Um, ooh, this is Okay, this is a great question. How does one remove the significance of some of the faces OCD can wear in regards to intrusive thoughts when one's been afflicted for years, when it's a diabolically disabled, a potentially great person? So first of all, I just want to say that whoever you're talking about, whether that's you or somebody else on here, I think y'all are awesome. And I actually think, and I may be partial or biased in saying this, but everybody that I've ever met with OCD, so all of y'all on here, are just the most creative, awesome, talented, funny, wonderful human beings. And I actually think sometimes that's why it's so easy for OCD to latch on. I think OCD takes on the same brilliance that you all have. Um, and I think removing the significance of those phases of OCD is taking away the power from the OCD, is beginning to recognize and accept that you have a disorder, right? That even though you are this brilliant, smart, funny, awesome person, that you do, in fact, have a mental disorder that can change the way that you look at the world and change the way that you look at yourself. I think recognizing that you have a disorder, that your brain can actually be tricked by itself, can be really powerful in separating yourself from that disorder. I think one of the toughest things for me going into that kind of disabling someone who is potentially great, and I would take away that potentially great, because even with OCD, I want you to know you're still great, you're still awesome, you're still wonderful, and OCD can't take that away from you. But for me, I had a really tough time um, with the idea that I had this disorder that could make me trick myself. I mean, I went through a period of time where I legitimately thought I was a harmful, dangerous person that needed to be locked up because of my intrusive thoughts. And I was living that I was worried I was living this like double life as a minister, right? And it was for a while, it was actually more comfortable for me to believe that my intrusive thoughts were true than to actually accept I had a disorder that could completely trick my brain, that I could be tricking myself in this way. So I think the acceptance of the disorder, accepting that OCD can trick you, accepting that OCD can take on all of these different forms, that it can impact you throughout your life, accepting the grief and the shame around all of that, you're able to then take away its power and say, but I'm not going to let it do that anymore. I am stronger than this. I am stronger than my OCD. And no matter what it's taken from me, I'm going to take my life back. And I really believe that any point in your life that you might find yourself at, that it's never too late and that it's still possible for you to reclaim that life that you deserve as that great person that you are. Um, okay. Hmm. Yeah, you can do this. Seeing determination is stronger than it's ever been, and I get that need for support, and I hope you feel supported on here tonight, and I hope everybody here feels supported tonight, that you are not alone, and there's all these awesome folks in the chat, but it's hard. Okay, so let's see. Being alone in the gray is uncomfortable. Mhm. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that this is encouraging. I just want to say thank you for sharing. When you say you will get better, your OCD is not different. It's encouraging. I really mean it. Because gosh, and I did. I mean, literally, my Instagram post was about this morning, because I just remember watching things like this and thinking they have no idea. And it really is such a trick of the OCD. And I hear this from folks every day about, well, my intrusive thoughts are different, or ERP isn't going to work for me. And just remember, every other person on here tonight is thinking that exact same thing. And it's just you do deserve to get better, and you will. You will. Um, let's see. Um, yeah, compulsive staring. I see some folks talking about that. I do not know a ton on this topic, but this definitely is something that's been coming up more. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any. Okay. This is one that kind of encompasses a lot of things that I'm seeing tonight. OCD always tells me that it's not OCD, that it's me and my own desires, kind of blaming myself for all of the obsessions and compulsions. Yes, this is so, so, so common and kind of goes to what I was talking about before, where a lot of times we feel like ours is different. This is another trick that OCD likes to use. It likes to say, well, this is just who you are, or this is just you being a horrible person, right? So this is really common. And I just really want to emphasize again the fact that thoughts are thoughts are thoughts, right? Intrusive thoughts are just thoughts. We all have weird thoughts. But the reason you're stuck on the ones that you're stuck on is because of what's important to you. So for a parent, they might be stuck on intrusive thoughts about their child. For a teacher or an educator, maybe intrusive thoughts about their students. You might be stuck on intrusive thoughts about a partner or a spouse. You might really value your life and the safety of loved ones and be stuck on things around contamination. Again, it's going to get stuck to anything that's important to you. So OCD is OCD, thoughts are thoughts. It's stuck to things that are important to you. It's not about them being desires of yours. It's actually the opposite. Sometimes OCD can make us really question our values. And I like to say, if you don't know what your values are, look at what OCD is attacking and kind of trail back to the opposite. If OCD is telling you that you're a harm to your kids are probably the most important to you. So I just want you to hear OCD is not at all about your desires. It's actually ego dystonic, which means it's directly opposing your desires, but really it's just attaching to those things that are important to you. Don't blame yourself for your obsessions. It just has to do with things that are significant, not about who you are as a person. At the same time, here, let me say this too. All of those things, but also these are great opportunities for exposures. So as you're working with your clinician, some great scripting can happen around this. Because for me, I actually used to do a lot of scripting around, well, this may or may not mean something about me as a person. I may or may not have to sit with that. I'm never going to know for certain, right? We can still kind of have our wink and our lean into what we were talking about before of having radical faith, probably OCD, but I'm willing to risk and sit with that uncertainty because that's really how you continue to fight the OCD and get better. Okay. Yes, thank y'all thank you all so much for the kind words. And I'm so glad that that some folks have gotten hope tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. I see folks talking about how just the idea of sitting with the gray just totally freaks them out. So here's the thing, too. If I have said something tonight that you've been like, ooh, I don't want to do that, that's terrifying, that's a really good reason to do it. So if when I was talking about sitting with the gray, you were like, ooh, not for me, definitely do it. Something that you're not wanting to do or that OCD is telling you not to do, probably a good sign that you should do it to fight your OCD. Um, Okay. Oh, okay. What about a fear having to do with evil? I just can't accept the thoughts. Yeah, so I hear a lot about evil in a lot of different contexts, particularly around religious scrupulosity. And again, this isn't about a particular faith tradition. I hear this from folks who are Muslim and Buddhist and Sikh and Christian and Jewish and atheist and agnostic and humanist, kind of across the board. And this can seem really scary too, because often someone might link evil with the idea of salvation or with the idea of forever or with their moral compass. And I would encourage you to reframe that second part of what you said from I just can't accept the thoughts with I just won't, or I'm just too afraid to in this moment. Because I don't want you to give the OCD that much power in terms of saying that you can't accept them because they're just thoughts. And I just want to remind you, they can't hurt you. Thoughts can't hurt you. The only thing that can hurt you is OCD really taking over your life which when we say, well, we can't accept the thoughts, is we're giving it permission to do that. And Anne Marie, you deserve so much more than letting OCD take over your life because of this fear. So I would encourage you to say, well, I'm afraid to accept the thoughts right now, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to sit with that anxiety. So even with something having to do with evil, that's where we get into some really great ERP work that can seem really frightening, that can seem really scary, but that's actually tackling the OCD, that isn't opposing a faith tradition or anything else important to you, but helping you get back to that in a meaningful way. So that might mean that you're doing some particular scripting around evil, or reading things and saying, oof, this may or may not be bringing on the evil, or something like that. And again, this is coming from someone who's worked in a lot of faith traditions, who really believes that those thoughts are not things that are dangerous. The only thing that's harming you is saying, well, I'm not going to live my life because of this OCD. So I would encourage you to lean into it, to stick with the ick, to engage in exposure and response prevention, even if it feels different with this one, because it's not. Just like I've said a bunch of times tonight, it can feel so scary, but it's not different. And this is a theme that you also can engage in ERP with. What's your Instagram? Yeah, I have it on my thing actually right now. It's Rev K runs beyond OCD. So yeah, I have all things faith, OCD, advocacy, 50 ultras, and all the stuff there. Yeah. Um, let's see. Do you believe? Okay, yeah, I love that. I do believe that we'll beat this. I can remember back when I didn't have OCD, I didn't have any of these thoughts. That always reminds me that I'm fighting a monster and not my own nature. Yeah, very much so. Like, you will very much beat this. And I know some folks have navigated OCD since before they can remember. For some folks, it actually feels like you remember that point where you flipped into the OCD. But I really do believe that everyone has the capacity to get back to that space of the life that they want, and the life that they desire. Um, yeah, I really appreciate. Yeah, I see we're talking about self-love a little bit here too, and self-compassion. I am a really, really, really big believer in self-love and self-compassion. And I think often, and y'all can let me know in the chat if you agree with this, I think often folks with OCD tend to be really hard on ourselves. I'll speak for me. I tend to be really hard on myself. And because of my intrusive thoughts, because of the things I experienced, I quite frankly hated myself for a very long time. Absolutely hated myself. And I could show compassion and love to every person around me. I could support kids who are going through traumas, and I could come home and just think I was the worst person in the world and treat myself like absolute crap. And I'll say that that's very much how I was. And even when I first started going through treatment, I was really trying to get better for my students. I was trying to get better for the folks around me. I wasn't trying to get better for myself. And I think it was a really big turning point for me when I also realized that I really did deserve to get better. And then I could offer myself that same love and compassion that I was showing to those around me, and that I deserve to enjoy my life. And I would encourage y'all to continue to think about that too, in the ways that you do deserve to get better. Yes, for those around you and those people that you love and that you care about. But also just for you, because you deserve a beautiful life, and the world also deserves you. Do I? Yeah, so No CD has a ton of groups. So definitely check out all of the No CD groups. And for anybody who went over to my Instagram, I run faith and OCD support groups as well through kind of my website. So y'all can check that out. The link to my website's on my Instagram too. But there's a ton of free No CD support groups each week too. Let's see. Okay, we are almost out of time. So I'm going to try to get one or two more questions in here. We'll just go a couple minutes over to get the last couple just down here. Um, Ooh, okay, this is a good one. This one's gonna make me think at the end of the day. Okay, if I'm scared of something happening and I attempt to imagine it happening and try to sit with it, is it a form of ERP or is it just another form of rumination disguised as if it were ERP? Genesis, this is a stellar question. I think it depends. I think it depends on the function and really looking for, well, what is the function of that particular exercise? If you are intentionally bringing it on to try to check, to try to make sure that it's actually OCD, to try to make sure that something bad's not going to happen, yeah, probably rumination, especially if you're doing that over and over again. If you are doing that as kind of a pre-planned exposure, either with a clinician or it's a part of your hierarchy, I would say yes, ERP. But if it becomes something that's repetitive where you're using it kind of as a form of checking, I would definitely think that could become rumination. I'll give you an example. For me, um, let's see. So for me with moral scrupulosity, there's some particular events and points of my life that are triggering, right? So there were some exposures that I was specifically supposed to do in thinking about those points and about those events. But eventually that actually did become compulsive for me because I would bring them up just to make sure that they were true or that I remembered them correctly or that it wasn't bad. And that becomes compulsive. If I'm trying to bring on anxiety to sit with it, that's ERP. If I'm trying to check something or if I'm trying to decrease anxiety with it, that's rumination, that's compulsive. So really thinking about that function. Okay. Um, okay, and I think I'm missing some of the conversations here, but folks who were talking about being worried about going to groups and things like that or having too many questions, no, y'all are always welcome to go to any no CD groups or any of my groups. Y'all are always, always, always welcome. Just want y'all to know you're welcome to have questions. I have been in the same place that y'all are, and just yes, please go to groups, please engage. Y'all are always welcome. So I know I went a little bit over. I also know I didn't get into every single question on here, but I am so thankful for y'all, and I feel like I was kind of all over the place tonight, but just really appreciate getting to be with you. I appreciate the awesome questions, and again, just really encourage y'all to remember that you can get better and that you get this choice. There's this really cool element of choice that can feel scary. I used to get frustrated when folks would tell me I had a choice because I'd feel like, oh, it doesn't feel like a choice, right? But you can, and you have agency and you have power to take these skills and these tools to move forward in a way that's value driven and recovery driven. And y'all can do it. You can totally do it. So I think I'll leave you tonight by saying I would encourage you to be more afraid of giving up your life to OCD than all of the scary stuff coming true. So again, I'd encourage you to be more afraid of giving your life up to OCD than all of the scary stuff coming true. Because really right now, if you're engaging in compulsions, the only thing that's certain is that if you continue to go down that road, you're going to continue to make yourself sicker by accepting the uncertainty, by leaning into that thing that you don't know. You have the shot at this big, beautiful life that you can live. This life that 2 years ago, quite honestly, I didn't think I'd be living. And this life that a year from now, you could be looking back and saying, you know what, a year ago, I made that choice to sit with the fear and it was worth it. So I just encourage y'all to know that it's worth it, to know that you are worth it, and to do the things that you need to do to lean into the uncertainty, to sit with the discomfort, to stick with the ick, all of the stuff. So would love to continue to connect with folks. Feel free to reach out on my Instagram. My website is on there too with all things faith and OCD and religious group, and as well as my 50 ultras in 50 states for no CD initiative. So if you want to follow that, you're more than welcome to. And I encourage you to continue to plug into all things no CD. There are awesome support groups, awesome streams like this all week. And y'all have got this. So thank you for being with me tonight, and I will see you next time. If I can find the end broadcast button. Oh, here we go. Okay, goodbye for real.